Hello and welcome to the BizNews Breakfast Briefing. I'm Lucy Ferreira for BizNews.com. In today's show, we hear from the Chief Executive of Arcelor Mittal, Kobus Verster, following the release of the steelmaker's interim results late last week. He discusses the market's response to the results, what looking to the future predicts for the entity, and the metrics that would be required to drive the kind of economic rejuvenation that Dr. Frans Cronje predicted for a coalition-led South Africa come 2024. You can find both of these interviews at BizNews.com to hear more about the impact of global supply chain woes and the Russia-Ukraine conflict on the steel sector in South Africa, as well as the reason for Dr. Cronje's uncharacteristic optimism for the future of the country in a separate interview. Those highlights are followed by the global daily news update from our partners, the FT in London. But first up, starting off on Monday, we have Alec Hogg with an update on what's been happening in the markets and why.
Thank you, Lucy. Today is Monday, the 1st of August. And well, you can cheer because this has been the best month since April 2020. And you might recall that April 2020 was when the international markets bounced off the big falls that we saw after COVID-19, the lockdowns, etc. in March. In the past month, the Nasdaq was the highest performing index in the world of all the major indices. That was up by 12.5%. The S&P 500 was amongst the highest performing indices in the world, and that was up by just over 9%. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange joined in the party, not quite as aggressively, but we were 5% higher here in South Africa. As far as the individual stocks are concerned, well, it was the big ones who made the running. Amazon was 27% higher. Apple was up by around 20% as well. So some very, very big increases. On Friday, the S&P 500 index continued in the same vein. That was 1.5% higher, and the Nasdaq Composite was up by nearly 2%. However, the Rand lost a little bit of ground over the weekend, 16 cents lower against the US dollar. We were at 16 Rand 63. 20 cents easier against the pound and the euro. 20 Rand 26 will buy 1 pound. 17 Rand is what you need to buy 1 euro. Not such good news on that front if you combine it with the Brent crude price. That rose by almost $2 a barrel to $110 a barrel. The gold price holding on to its higher levels, $1,762 an ounce, up $3 over the weekend. Bitcoin was down about 2% on where it closed on Thursday. At the moment, it's trading at $23,385 per Bitcoin, and that reflected in a Geltec basket, which is level at the moment at $454, but a 5% improvement from where we were on Thursday. So digital currency doing pretty well. Here in South Africa, the best mover on the past month was Telkom, which picked up nearly 20% in its share price. Tiger Brands quietly went forward. That was up by 16%, and Richemont 14.5%. The MTN Group 5% better, and we saw some improvement on the banks. First Rand 5%, Nedbank 4.5%, Standard Bank 3%. Across the board, it was a much better month for shares on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. There were some losers, though, particularly in the resources sector, where Anglo Platinum lost 11%, Kumba 6%, Sasol lost 6%. But outside of that, pretty steady as she goes. So what's happening, and why was July such a good month? Well, the Nasdaq Composite Index, which reflects the share prices of exponential companies, those companies who should be benefiting by this swing in the global economy to more of an information age. The Nasdaq for the year as a whole, after that 12% increase in July, is still down by 21%. So it's been a very rough period for those shares. The view amongst individual investors is just go beyond what is happening right now. Use it as a buying opportunity. And there is an organization called Vanda Research in the United States which tracks what individuals, in other words, private investors, are buying and how much of it. And the story coming out of that this morning is that individuals in America have bought more shares and been more confident in their purchases than at any time since 2014. So that is what has been driving the market in July. The increase was very much a result of the individuals and hence those significant share prices movements that you see in their favorites. The biggest purchase, though, was in the S&P 500 index, and there individuals in America are investing about $100 million a month. They're putting about $75 million a month into the NASDAQ Composite Index, that QQQ index, which we also have in the BizNews portfolios. And then $60 million a month is being invested into Apple shares, about 20 million each into Amazon and Alphabet. So you can see where the numbers are going and where the interest is for the investors from the United States. So looking ahead to August, well, the month has started well, but we will need to see some kind of a follow-through on the enthusiasm that investors have shown during the month of July. As mentioned earlier, the best returns that we've seen on the markets since April 2020.
And now for Alex Results interview with Kobus Verster, CEO of Arcelor Mittal.
There was a lot of anticipation before today's interim results, Kobus. Your share price going up well, but I see there are some people who aren't that excited. The price down 12.5%. Do you think this is just a story of maybe buying on rumor and selling on fact?
Good afternoon, Alec. Yeah, I think there's two things most likely impacting that. I think that we have given some guidance on some stormy clouds in the market. I think we were fairly outright around that, so I think that may be one. And then there's also people that's expecting a dividend. I think we've got a way to go to fix our balance sheet. So I think it's those two or one of the two that had the impact on that.
I'm going to dive straight into fixing your balance sheet because you have made an announcement previously that you are keen to become less dependent on Eskom, going into 200 megawatt plants, renewable plants. Now that President Ramaphosa has lifted the restriction of 100 megawatt, might you go for a bigger project?
Alec, yes, I think so. I think depending on the detail, we would like, well, firstly to accelerate those two, not wait for 2-3 years to get the benefits of those, and then most likely upscale one of them, at least the Van der Bijl portion, because the 200 megawatt is the start. Our long-term decarbonization ambitions from a renewable perspective is 500 megawatts. So to see how the balance sheet, the funding can accommodate the acceleration of that would be important.
So is that going to push dividends further out?
Well, I think it's most likely going to be off-balance sheet funding. I think the dividend's more a question around, I think a cyclical business like ourselves need to run in a net cash positive position. So we're not there yet. And I think once we've reached that, then we can talk about dividends.
Because the detail in the results that you released today also referred to the difficulties, another difficulty of doing business in South Africa, and that is with Transnet, and that you're looking to do something quite revolutionary there as well, perhaps investing in your own trains. Just explain that.
I mean, currently regulation doesn't allow that, and we hope there will be some relaxation at some point in time. So, to the extent that we can assist through a third party, I don't think I want locos on my balance sheet, but if we can join up with a logistical expert provider that can support us in being less vulnerable to Transnet, that is something that we will aggressively pursue.
Kobus, we had a fascinating discussion in the BizNews studio a little while ago. We went into quite a lot of depth on Arcelor Mittal. And from that, it's very clear that you've been through an incredibly difficult time, that you've implemented disciplines and they are paying off, particularly now when you look ahead, your production is going to rise. But is there anything on the horizon that is going to justify the excitement that we saw about Arcelor Mittal from shareholders in the last couple of years?
Well, I think if you look at, we ultimately at the lowest level of production. So we have capacity available that we need to unlock. Capacity that won't require any capex. Ultimately, we have a 6.4 million ton liquid steel capacity. Our plans is normally to produce around 3.2, 3.4 million tons a year, and then we miss that. But from an investment futuristic perspective, how do you unlock that additional volumes? As I said, it doesn't need investment. It needs market. It needs cost base. So our challenge is how do we chip away at the issues that still make us uncompetitive? That being rail, energy. I think the solutions are there. It's just going to take a bit of time, and then labor productivity and cost is a bigger burden than people think about. In South Africa, you talk about us having a group. The benefits also for us to compare our cost per ton and per process per country and stuff, and you would think that we would be cheap. On the contrary.
And I guess the other big thing is if you get a domestic market that is growing, if you get a South African economy that does start expanding. And on this, I had a fascinating discussion yesterday with Dr. Frans Cronje, who's been a bear in South Africa or on South Africa for 15 years. And he's suddenly getting excited about the potential for a new political dispensation and the impact that'll have on the economy. What is the gearing effect of an Arcelor Mittal in that kind of scenario? In other words, if the economy starts growing here in South Africa, 5, 6, 7%.
When you talk about GDP of 1.8%, that's about flat from a steel perspective. You will not have steel demand growth. But as soon as you move beyond 2.5%, that accelerated exponentially. It really has a hockey stick effect. So when you talk about 5%, I don't have the precise numbers, but growth, most probably you'll have 12% steel growth. So I think coming back to your earlier question, those are the potential excitements that you have a business that's running at 40 or 50% of nameplate capacity, and you have a social, political, economic environment that can hopefully, with a bit of luck, also move into a different trajectory. That would be the best scenario for all of us.
But particularly for a company like yours, given the ability to increase your capacity without additional investment.
100%. A place like Saldanha Steel's got a 1.1 million ton, just waiting for us to find the solutions to some of its problems. And then, as I said, when you talk about domestic growth and stuff, Newcastle's a long products business. It's geared towards the construction, and you've got a 0.8 million ton additional product capacity available without capex, but you still need people to move up that volumes. So there's at least a positive gearing in terms of job creation as well.
Just to close off with, you are part of an international group. Is the Mittal family or the Arcelor Mittal top structure looking at South Africa as a possible turnaround situation, or are they less optimistic than, say, Dr. Frans Cronje is?
Mr. Mittal operate in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, India, Mexico. It will be difficult to get him negative. No, they're positive about the company and the country. They understand that jurisdictions got complexity that's unique, and mostly in the world, they've got local management that need to navigate through these things. They'll give the technical, strategic support.
Good morning from the Financial Times. Today is Monday, August 1st, and this is your FT News Briefing. Europe and the UK are easing up on Russian oil sanctions. Investors are returning to the crypto market, and in China, struggling property developers are delaying construction projects, and millions of frustrated mortgage holders don't know when their homes will be finished.
A few of them have the courage to take to the streets, but a lot of them have stopped paying mortgages.
We'll talk about Beijing's latest effort to fix the property crisis. I'm Jess Smith, in for Mark Filipino, and here's the news you need to start your day. This week, the Bank of England meets, and policymakers there are under pressure to step up the pace of monetary tightening. The U.S. Federal Reserve and Europe's central bank recently announced unusually large rate hikes to try and counter persistent inflation. British central bankers have been raising rates by 0.25 percentage point increments. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey said when policymakers gather this Thursday, a half-point increase is on the table, but it's not locked in. The global energy crisis is forcing Western powers to ease back on their efforts to limit Russian oil trading. The UK has delayed a plan for a coordinated ban with the European Union on providing insurance to vessels carrying Russian oil. That's due to fears that imposing immediate worldwide restrictions would cause crude oil prices to spike.
UK cooperation was absolutely pivotal because the UK, and Lloyd's of London in particular, is the biggest maritime insurance market in the world.
That's our senior energy correspondent, Tom Wilson.
And so really for a global ban to have any effect, the UK needs to be a part of it. So the EU went ahead on the basis that they believed that the UK was going to follow suit. And then the UK has held back from pushing ahead as quickly as we expected them to. And other reasons for that is this concern that doing so would potentially pull a huge amount of Russian oil off the market and spike prices. They're basically delayed to see, can they, with other G7 countries, figure out a way to get this different, complicated price cap mechanism in place before imposing this type of ban. And then hopefully they can have the kind of twin effects that they're seeking, which is to cause economic pain to Russia whilst preventing huge economic pain to the rest of the world by driving up prices and therefore inflation.
And in another move, Tom says the EU also quietly introduced a subtle amendment to some of the existing restrictions on dealings with Russian oil exporters.
And specifically, this is most relevant to Rosneft, which is the Russian state-owned oil producer. Previously, European companies were banned from all financial dealings with Rosneft, but they've now introduced a new exemption which says that European companies can deal with Rosneft and can potentially pay Rosneft for oil if that oil is going to be exported or delivered to other countries outside of the EU.
That's the FT's senior energy correspondent, Tom Wilson. A painful crash in the cryptocurrency market earlier this year frightened many investors away, but some are starting to return. Investment products that track crypto assets have pulled in about $400 million since the beginning of last month. That's the longest run of sustained weekly net inflow since March. Here's the FT's Scott Cipollina.
Now that the market seems to have stabilized, at least momentarily, for a few weeks, some folks have started to think perhaps this crypto winter period is over. On social media, I'm starting to see some of the common talking points and narratives that some of crypto's advocates will say. One example is that crypto is a hedge against inflation. It's been very, very hard for anybody to make that case for obvious reasons in recent months. But I think, in the last few weeks where there's been some level of stability, at least as far as crypto standards are concerned, perhaps some people are considering whether or not those arguments might be appealing again. I'm not saying that they are myself. I just think that might be one of the areas of speculation that might be starting to get a little bit more momentum again for some investors.
That's the FT's digital assets correspondent, Scott Cipollina. In China, officials are getting nervous about social unrest stemming from the country's property crisis. Real estate developers are so burdened with debt, they're unable to complete construction projects. So millions of people are paying mortgages for homes that haven't been completed. The FT's Sun Yu reports that Beijing is now working on a $150 billion bailout fund to try and deal with those stalled projects.
The bailout project on its own isn't that big to some degree because there are so many unfinished half-built projects nationwide. It's the sort of backlash against the authority from angry homeowners that concerns Beijing. So to that end, the bailout is very important because right now, even the conservative estimate would point to at least 7 million to 8 million home buyers who are having trouble seeing their home being completed on time.
Sun Yu, what are frustrated homeowners doing that's making Beijing nervous?
A few of them have the courage to take to the streets, but a lot of them have stopped paying mortgages. It's just beyond their means. I mean, they make something like 5,000 to 6,000 RMB per month, and their mortgage payment per month would be something like 3,000 to 4,000. So it's more than half of their monthly income goes to mortgage payments, and now they can't get their home back.
What kinds of things are you hearing from homeowners? I mean, what did they tell you about their situation and how they feel about it?
One of these homeowners, he was a former real estate broker, and he actually understood the sector very well. He bought that 3 years ago, but at the time he thought it was a great deal. The price actually was high, but he thought the price will only go up. But then he told me that he didn't expect that the things to go down so fast. He had a mortgage of, I think, something like 4,000 RMB per month. So basically he's spending 2/3 of income on mortgage payments without getting his home back on time. The delivery of the home has been delayed for at least 9 months. And then he could not get married. He's really upset about that because if you want to get married, you need to have a home first. And he told me that he feels sort of hopeless with so many other homeowners. So there's this general feeling of sort of hopelessness, disillusionment among the average people in China.
So this bailout that the government's now working on, is it aimed at helping developers complete the projects so they can finally hand them to owners?
Not necessarily. The idea now is for the local governments or local government-owned entities to take over these projects. And then they will take project loans from either the central bank or the commercial banks to complete them. So it won't have anything to do with developers this time. That's the idea. Because developers owe so much debt. The government don't want them to be involved to some degree.
So why would the government hand these projects to local officials? I mean, would local officials be able to complete the projects more successfully than the original developers?
This actually is a good question. And this is the challenge that the government is now facing because local authorities are not really more efficient. Number one. Number two, the problem with completing these projects is that many of these projects, they already come with a lot of debt. So to some degree, the government want to find a way to get rid of this debt or just to ignore this debt and to focus on completing the projects. But can they do so? That's an open question because as soon as these projects, they got any new financing, the old creditors, right? The suppliers, the contractors, they'll chase for money. So that's the challenge. So who do you pay for first? The old creditors or the project itself or even the bondholders? That's the issue.
Sun Yu is the FT's China economics correspondent. Thanks, Sun Yu.
Sure.
You can read more on all these stories at ft.com. This has been your daily FT News Briefing. Make sure you check back tomorrow for the latest business news.
And that's all from the briefing for today. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, follow, and share wherever you like to listen. And remember that you can find today's highlighted interview and so much more on BizNews.com.